as a young man at 15 years old and now spending 65 years in Indian nations politics, I haven't stopped. In many of those years of 65 years, this work was done with no money at all. And we went to communities. We went to organizations. So when we look at the status of the organizations today, those were built historically for many decades by our elders and former leaders. The Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations is governed by a convention, which is a political agreement signed by the bands and the communities and their governments of their nations, respectively. Ratified by their membership. We crisscrossed Saskatchewan for 2.5 years, going from band to band, to make sure that the membership ratified the convention. Like I said, that is a political agreement forming the Federation of Nations of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indians. The name has been included to include the term Indigenous. Indigenous has no rights or status that exists. And any change of the title to the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations has to go back through the same process that we took to set it up in the first place. But what's happening today is the Convention and Convention Act, which is an act that governs lawfully under our jurisdiction and laws all the governing bodies of the Federation of Nations. And that's not being implemented formally. What's being implemented is FSI Inc. under provincial corporate law. Just an administrative structure, not a political organization and governing structure of the Federation of Nations, of FSIN, that impacts directly on every community, every band, collectively, and every government of our nations, collectively. So when we look at that process of not implementing the FSIN Convention Act, that has to be enforced and implemented not just by a central governing body of the Federation of Nations, but by every chief and council. Your community is a member of the Federation of Nations. And when you look at what's being done, like I said, frustration level is high because internally the administrative agenda and structure is being implemented under FSI Inc. that was in the process going from the Union of Saskatchewan Chiefs to the FSI Inc. in 56, 57, 58. 79 to 1982, that was changed to the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations under the Convention Act. The other thing that annoys me to some degree, I'm too old now to get offended. My skin is 7 generations thick after all these years of being engaged in these political processes of our Indian nations. But the Assembly of First Nations hasn't been implemented either. And you hear all these complaints nationally by leaders and Indian people. AFN is not doing anything. Of course it's not doing anything. It hasn't been implemented. The political organization and governing structures of AFN has never been implemented. All that's been implemented up to now, up to 2 years ago, was NIB Inc. under provincial or federal corporate law again, under their jurisdiction. Now at Vancouver, a couple of years ago or so, a motion was passed to change NIB Inc. to AFN Secretariat Inc., still operating a corporate entity under provincial or corporate law. That's not AFN. AFN requires every nation that forms the Assembly of First Nations to get their political agenda in order and get their act together, respecting how they're going to implement collectively their responsibilities and duties with their national agenda of their nation and how it overlaps and connects to the national agenda of all the nations of AFN. Now, these are the types of code of silences that I don't see happening and debated in any assembly and any meeting. So if you're serious, then that's what we need to do. And stop the colonial genocide policies of the empires historically, and now of Canada and other countries around the world, like Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world in South Central America, Africa, India, and so on. Now, these are fundamental issues and the facts that I'm talking about that are being ignored to implement the modern-day treaties that are domestic treaties. Why are they different from the international treaties? It's because both parties that form and make the international treaties have to give them legal effect under their government jurisdiction and law. The modern-day treaties today in Canada are being legislated and given legal effect by only one party to the treaty. And that has to be changed by those governments of those nations that have made those treaties to bring them up to a standard level of international treaties. That's a fundamental difference between the international treaties that we made and the modern-day treaties that are being made today. So keep in mind that your sovereignty, inherent sovereignty, existed prior to you making treaties. So when we talk about and hear the elders say, the spirit and intent of treaty has to be implemented. So everything that I've identified for you in terms of our inherent sovereignty, our inherent national powers of governing, our national powers of treaty making, our treaty making processes, historically and today, our inherent rights by title, by sector, the inherent rights and title to lands, resources, and water and jurisdiction for airspace, and now our treaties and treaty rights. That's a whole agenda that we're not implementing collectively, and we have duties and responsibilities individually, collectively of our communities, and our bands and our governments of our nations, and our nations collectively.